I go as far as to advocate cold applying is a waste of your time. It's just not going to work. You're going to spend all this time clicking. It's going to get nowhere. Whereas if you just take half of that energy and go talk to other humans, you'll probably get a lot further along in your process.
The big concerns we have is people using AI not knowing what they're putting in there, security potential vulnerabilities, or the other side of it, they're just throwing something in there, they don't know what it's doing, and now they're breaking a different part of the code base and well, not my team. That's not a great developer to have on the team in general. You don't want to do too much cleanup.
If you ask me, what's the one thing you should be focusing on to get a job? It's having something that you can show to another living, breathing human that you have the skills that you say you have, that you have a real technical challenge you can talk through. You talk through all the things you learn and that whole journey. That gives you the real meat that enables you to get through those interviews.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Programming Podcast. I am Danny Thompson. You want to introduce yourself?
And I'm Leon Noel. Let's get into it.
I'm leaving that in. Forget it.
Let's do it.
I'm leaving that in. We're not editing that out. All right, cool. We'll get a hang of this thing soon enough. All right. So today, I was kind of brainstorming on ideas, and there was one that I kind of organically found, and I think it's going to be a good discussion. And I was talking with somebody at an organization, and they were talking about how they were worried about candidates because they give a take-home test as part of the interview process. And they were worried that some candidates are utilizing AI to essentially cheat the test. Yeah. To which I said, the way that I see the interview process evolving is going to be something completely different than what you're even picturing right now. And so I kind of want to get your take on that. And now I have a lot of opinions on interviews. I think you do as well. But I guess, what is your opinion on the current state of the interview process now? What do you think people should be preparing for? And I guess we can kind of get into the topic after this on how we see the interview process evolving as a whole.
Yeah, I guess I kind of have a slightly contrarian take when it comes to interviews. I've actually always kind of been a fan of the leak code style type interview. One, just because it helps reduce bias. Typically, the folks I work with transitioning into tech, there's a lot of bias that comes up in the hiring process. So if there's something that I can study, that I can have a binary true or false, call you out on your BS when I do rock it and 360 slam dunk it, that was always a win. Now, is it the best process for you finding a great candidate to work at your company? Probably not. And I've always really wished that as you're going through a hiring process, it mimicked what you were doing day to day in the job. But also, I always see interviews as a two-way street. I want the interview process to be me evaluating the company as much as the company's evaluating me, but also getting an idea of how they work as engineers at the company. And so, is AI part of your process? Is pair programming part of your process? Is getting help, seeking out resources? Are all these things part of what you would expect an engineer on your team to be doing day in and day out? Why are we not letting our candidates do that as well while they're interviewing? And so I think if you give a take home or you do any type of interview process, I want the folks that are going through that process to have access to all the tools that they would have on the job. Maybe that starts to include AI too. What do you think?
It's interesting that you say that because especially on social media, there's always this take where they feel like at least some people say often, DSA interviews are biased because it takes advantage of the person that may not necessarily have the time or abilities to grind leak code because maybe they're a parent or they have a job and they're a parent, and so they don't have those times. And so they prefer a different style of interviewing altogether that could accommodate them. Do you not feel that way? Do you feel like that DSA interview is
I think when most of the folks that I've worked with, you're still putting in a year to 3 years of work to get into this career. I'm not the person that likes to say the 12-week boot camp and then you get the job route. I see getting into this career as a normal 4 to 5 year process. Anything you can do less than that, less than those 4 years that you would spend and $100,000+ on a CS degree, anything you could do less than that, that's a huge win, right? And so for me, I rather you get the skills you need, be freelancing along the way, be taking opportunities to make money along the way, but then at the end have something that's a little bit more binary as to whether or not you did a good job. Because whenever you're interviewing, there's really like two games that you're playing. It's the, can I do the job? Like, can I solve the problem at hand? But do I want to work with this person for the next 2 years is often like the second piece that comes up a lot. And so when you have softer interviews where it's more of the behavioral, tell me about your projects, I've just seen through my experience, the students that I work with not have the same references or the same jokes to pepper in throughout those interviews that helps them pass that second portion. So if I can go to something that's truly just like, did you solve the problem? Did you use the right algorithm? Can we grind that out for 3 months, 6 months? Yeah, that's a good way in. Now, is it a reasonable path for everyone? Absolutely not. Is it how most of my students get their jobs? Probably not. But if I'm trying to figure out a way that's a little bit more fair to the individuals that kind of fall into that place where the softer interviews might cause them problems, it's something that I saw as I always see kind of as a win. And so with like the bigger companies, like if you're talking about like FANG tier companies, these are the people that are going to be doing those style interviews. And it winds up being a little bit fairer for those individuals going through that process. Yeah, that's kind of where I come through it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like so I'll say this, I think everyone has an opinion on interviews, right? I can tell you, I've only in my entire career ever had one interview for a technical position that did not involve DSA. But now I know people on the other side of the spectrum where they've never had a DSA interview, right? And I think that just depends where you're located, what companies you're applying for, who you're talking to. A lot of factors get involved there, right? And so I'm not opposed to the DSA interview. I will say, as an effective tool of judgment on a developer's abilities, I don't think it's the best. I would rather pair program with somebody for the same amount of time that I'd allocate to a DSA interview. And I feel like that's going to tell me way more about that candidate than the DSA thing. Now, if you're going for the Googles of the world, different, right? Or I'll tell you this, I had an interview at a company that is not a tech company, and I feel like it was the best interview I've ever had, where it was at AutoZone. And you know what? Kudos to AutoZone on this, because I genuinely believe this was a great interview experience for the interviewer, for the interviewee. And basically the interview that I had, and I'm sure it's going to be different for others, but the one that I had was, you need to build a component that currently exists on the website. So it's not some arbitrary task. And it seemed through the prompts and explanations like a very doable task in an hour's time. And as you start peeling the layer back, you instantly realize there's no way on God's green earth is this ever going to get done in an hour, right? And so you're pressure and you feel pressure and this and that, la da da da. And they're watching you. Of course, he's answering some questions, but even he's like, hey, let's limit the questions. I want to see how you go about this. You can Google, you can use Stack Overflow, you can use all that. And I'm going through it and I'm trying to figure it out. You don't finish in an hour. I ended up getting the job, and that's when I realized, I was told rather, the objective isn't to finish it in an hour, but the objective is to see how far you can get through, how you're searching things, because they know you're going to research things on the job. How are you going about researching it? How effectively are you reading it? And I was like, that's the way it should be, to kind of gauge who you're going to have on your team, how you're going to want to work with them and do technical things together, et cetera, et cetera. And it was an hour long. I barely made a dent in it. I got about halfway through the task. And it was a great experience all around. And I think it told them more than enough that they needed to know about me as a developer on the team, and vice versa, for them to advocate for me within those interview settings. But anytime I'm getting ready to go on the job search, the first thing I do is I start grinding leak code. Whether or not I get a DSA interview, no clue. But I'd rather be prepared for the interviews instead of not being prepared for the interview. And to be honest, the thing I tell people a lot is, you have no clue who's going to be on the other side of that desk. So you might as well be prepared for all instances instead of just hoping you get the most optimal outcome possible where all the stars aligned for you.
When we look at the folks that get jobs out of 100 devs, most of them do not make it to like a FANG level data structures algorithm type question. They'll be softer, like Code Wars S type problems. And the pieces that we're seeing them go into, that probably matter the most are actually the behavioral rounds. And in those behavioral rounds, they're not just normal like behavioral questions, but the behavioral rounds that kind of bleed into like asking technical questions as well, where they're trying to get a grasp of the projects you worked on, the scope of those projects, things like that. And a lot of folks are making it through their interviews, making it through those behavioral rounds, making it through those technical questions, and then kind of just getting a more of a, I guess, just like a gut check to make sure you actually can write the code, and then getting jobs. And so that process and what we emphasize has really played off for a lot of folks because they're networking their way in. So when you're networking your way in, maybe you're skipping a first round, or maybe there's some sort of signal, or at least you're getting into the process because just applying is not getting you in there. And then the behavioral pieces have always been the strongest actual factor in folks getting employed, because a lot of our folks don't actually even get to technical rounds. The number of folks that we have seen is in the hundreds that haven't had true technical rounds, which is kind of absurd to me. And one of the things that is always a thing that comes up in our community is this idea that, like, what if I'm not good at the people, the talking, those types of things? And how does that have an impact on their ability to write code or their ability to get the job in the long term? So I'm still seeing about 50-50, where about 50% of the time it's going to like a strong technical interview, but another 50% where they're not even getting there. It's all the other things, the softer skills, talking about projects that are actually the deciding factor.
Yeah, I think that's great. I can tell you right now, so you have 100 devs. I don't have anything on that scale as far as like a boot camp style teaching. We have a cohort that we do though. And essentially the idea is for 6 weeks, we pair beginners. Well, you got to be past the stage of a beginner, if I'm honest. You got to be junior dev, job ready kind of situation. Yeah. But maybe you haven't gotten a job yet. And so what we do is for like the course of 6 weeks, we put people on a team together being guided by a software developer that's already working in the industry. And they build a project that's actually worth talking about. We've had a lot of success come out of this cohort. Like we've got people that got jobs at NBC Universal and JP Morgan and all these places, but it's local to Dallas. Like there's no way to scale this because just how much hand holding is required. I wish we just did our largest cohort ever. And when I say logistical nightmare, that's like an understatement. Like it was so chaotic on our side, but we had our highest graduation rate ever. It was great from that respect. But wow, what a ridiculously intense 6 weeks it was for all me and my team at Dow Software Developers. We're just a bunch of organizers that donated our time. But wow, you're talking about how much of an uphill battle that one was.
Yeah. But I like that it culminates in a project, right? At 100 Devs, we call that our 100 hours project. You sink 100 hours into a project that you can actually talk about, that shows people that you actually have the skills that you have. That's always like, if you ask me like, what's the one thing you should be focusing on to get a job? It's like having something that you can show to another living, breathing human that you have the skills that you say you have, that you've have a real technical challenge you can talk through. You talk through all the things you learn and that whole journey, that gives you the real meat that enables you to get through those interviews. And so I think that's a really cool piece that came up during your program too.
I'll go to what I was going to talk about, but what's the interesting thing about this is people think like, oh, you made a project, they're going to come running for you. There's no centralized database of people that are learning how to code for companies to be like, oh, they finally got to this stage, time to call them up. No, the biggest point of that is, number one, you end up having ammunition to talk about within that interview process. But number two, you have the ammunition to talk about value within networking opportunities. So if I go to a meetup and I'm talking about a project like that, well, people are getting impressed. Prime example, when our cohort graduated, I invited devs from all over, like Uber and whatnot, and they just thought they were coming to a meetup. They didn't realize the graduation was happening, which is kind of the point, because people want to show support for graduation, but they really, I don't even want to go to the graduation for my nieces and nephews, and you talking about going to graduation for strangers? Come on now. And so I was like, how do I get people there to see these people? And so we combined the graduation with a meetup where we had guest speakers from like Netflix and Google, where they were sharing technical topics. So the incentive was there for them, but we spent 25 minutes doing the graduation for the cohort. And what
That's
did they get to do?
genius.
They get to showcase those projects, right? What were the projects? They built an AI facial recognition application that created a safe workspace. So if someone tried to log in using facial recognition that didn't belong to that computer, it would take their picture, save it in a database for the admin panel, and
That's
showcase
cool.
someone try to hack in. It sounds 10 million times more complicated than what it is, but that's kind of the point. The packaging of those applications go a long way. How you describe it and talk about it. I guess the point that I'm getting at that is you need to have value wherever you're going, but also don't get so caught up in thinking about interview number 3 and 4 that you forget about interview number 1, because that's the one that gets you to interview number 3 and 4. And a lot of beginners, not even beginners, to be honest with you. You know how many seniors I'm having that have this issue? How many managers I'm talking to? I'm like, you're the ones doing the dang interviewing. You don't know how to do it. It's crazy, but it's true. And so I guess this is kind of, at the start of the podcast, I kind of alluded to this, how we see the interview process evolving. And I guess I'll go with my take first because you kind of know it already. My belief, and this is kind of where I went into with this person when they were talking about how they were afraid someone would use AI for their take-home assessments. My thing is, I don't think that should be a concern. I genuinely believe if you're really concerned about that, you should have another part of the interview process. And this is the part that I think it's going to evolve, is gauging how they prompt AI. Because I don't care what level you're at. You know how many VPs I'm seeing use AI? How many junior developers I'm seeing? How many people in HR are using it? Everyone's has some kind of touch with AI. Apple Intelligence just came out, right? Where it's just ChatGPT and a wrapper. But that AI is also here now. That's very topical. I'm very hip. I'm on the know. But but everyone's touching AI. So why are we so nervous about it? If anything, I want to gauge the quality of their prompting, but also what are they doing after they get that prompt? Are they just copying and pasting it, throwing in the code to see if it works? Or are they gauging, saying, I'm reading the code, this isn't doing what I needed to do, so I need to reprompt it with an additional question or give it another task to kind of get the code that I need. And then after I paste it into my code base, then I'm adjusting it to fit exactly the mold of what I need.
Yeah.
If they're doing that versus the form of the options, that's a great candidate in regards to their usage of AI. But the big concerns we have is people using AI not knowing what they're putting in there, security potential vulnerabilities, or the other side of it, they're just throwing something in there, they don't know what it's doing, and now they're breaking a different part of the code base and well, not my team. That's not a great developer to have on the team in general. You don't want to do too much cleanup.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of really wild swings, right? Right now, we're just kind of in such the beginning stages of what AI is going to bring to the table in terms of our normal workflow. And I agree with what you're saying too. Just this idea that I want to see in an interview, was it ever really about the code, right? Was it more about your thought process? Was it more about how you approach problems? Was it about how you communicate? If we're actually testing for those things, the AI just makes it actually easier for us to figure a lot of those pieces out. And so I think if you're using it in the way that you mentioned, I think, that's going to be really revealing to see how they're prompting, how they're engaging with this tool could be really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. At least for me, whenever I was interviewing, that's the side that I always tried to show. Now, of course, you can have some organizations that are code quality is what I'm looking for. I don't care how you got there. And to be honest, maybe that aligns with what you want. Maybe it doesn't, right? That's also a determination you need to make within the interview process. For me, I'm fine with that. I have no problem writing code that they would judge and say, hey, this is good for our team, this is not. But I also think to some degree, employers need to start realizing you can teach a lot of the stuff that you need. And so if there's some rough edge here, or one prime example, I remember being on a team where we were evaluating a candidate and they created a solution. And one of the things that they said was, there's no responsiveness on this site. I was like, well, was that clearly explained in the prompts, or were you just going off the assumption that, hey, it's a desktop site? It's a take-home project. They're not making a full-scale solution here. You just need to see if they can create it for one scenario. You're not trying to see every single screen type. You're not trying to see this and that. But then the other thing, too, is I've seen candidates, and I wish more would do this, by the way, where they would take a take-home test and they wrote some unit tests with it. Do you know how many juniors I've had do that? Like, I drilled unit testing into the boot camps that I taught at, right? Because I genuinely believe for a lot of juniors, that's a big separation point from everybody that's learning how to code off of like free code camp on their own versus a developer that understands what's required to be on a team and the purpose of a unit test. And so if you're having effective unit testing, that goes a long way.
No. Yeah. Have you seen people integrating AI into their interview process yet? Like, have you seen like the memes and stuff like that online? I think I've done one TikTok and it went super viral. And it was when ChatGPT first came out, maybe like not the original one that was like pretty popular, like the next stage. And I just typed in the two-sum leak code and it immediately solved it. And I just threw all my like cracking the coding interview into the trash can and that took off. And so it's been pretty interesting to see like the voice controlled prompting now where someone's in an interview and it's actually like, I think that's where like the fear comes from, right? That the fear is that we're sitting here talking right now and everything I'm saying is going into some ChatGPT like interface, Claude Sonnet 3.5, whatever. And I'm getting all the prompting back to say what I need to say during the interview. Have you seen any of that stuff like actually creeping into the interview process yet?
I personally haven't, but I will say that, the only area that I've really seen AI jump into the interview process in a big way is HR. And not just, assuming that is there, but hearing from them, like they're using it in certain ways. Which, I mean, it's just going to speed up the process, but it also has to make you way more effective at how you're presenting yourself on your job applications, your resume, and your LinkedIn profile. But also, there's no AI that's going to beat whatever connections you make via networking.
Yeah.
I think that's like the big thing that a lot of people forget about. And to be honest with you, especially in today's market, you need more networking now than ever before. Like, it's tough, but it's true. And I think if you're working at a place, that should also be something that you're doing. How are you networking with other people there? Eventually, some of those employees may go somewhere else. That could be your referral into that organization. You never know. You should be networking no matter where you are. And I know that's kind of tough for someone who may find themselves as a natural introvert, or maybe they're adverse to networking and having those conversations. I can tell you from firsthand experience right now, my network has produced almost every single opportunity for me instead of cold applying. I won't tell you not to cold apply. You should absolutely cold apply, but I can tell you right now, you're going to have more favorable conversations come your way when people know what you're about and they can advocate for you when you're not in that conversation, as opposed to having to just learn about you off of a piece of paper.
I go as far as to advocate cold applying is a waste of your time. It's just not going to work. You're going to spend all this time clicking. It's going to get nowhere. Whereas if you just take half of that energy and go talk to other humans, you'll probably get a lot further along in your process. The interesting thing too is to think about how AI plays out. Like you said, from the recruiting perspective, eventually AI will be doing all of our resumes, all of our cover letters, all of like our first touches, like will be, it's like an AI recruiter looking at like an AI like applicant, like filter. So like, it's all going to be a wash. It's going to go back to the networking. Who do I know? Like, who can I actually talk to get around all this BS? That's just a AI arms race to see who gets to the forefront. So I think even now, like, your brand is going to be so important. Your ability to network with people is going to be so important. It's going to be it's going to be the only differentiator, probably. And I don't know how soon, but it's going to be one of the things that you have to think about is what is that differentiator when everyone can throw their resume into an AI tool, get it perfectly optimized to have all the impact statements, the percentages. Like, what is your edge? Like, what always when you're like thinking about getting a job, what is the edge that you can carry, right? The reason boot camps exploded because the edge was you could actually code. And then the next wave was knowing all the things that people overfocus on, like overfocusing on the leak code style interview and not taking the behavioral stuff seriously, not taking the networking seriously. So in this like new AI age, what's the edge? Like, how do you stand out in the market? How do you get the interviews? And I think it's the person-to-person connection. I think it comes back to the networking again.
I mean, it's definitely going to be a massive factor for sure. Yeah. It's the internet, Leon. We can't make blanket statements, man. Damn, I've been on Twitter long enough to know that by now.
Oh yeah,
you make a blanket statement, and you got 1,000 DMs that you got to deal with.
We need the podcast numbers to go up, so I'll take any of the engagement. I'm not here saying you should be doing leak codes. Like, that's just pure engagement bit at this point, you know? Like, we got to get the numbers up somehow.
I guess. Speaking of the podcast, I want to give a huge shout out to today's sponsor, us. No one is sponsoring this thing, so if you want to sponsor, let us know. But I'll say huge shout out to the Commit Your Code conference for charity that's happening in December.
Let's go.
By the time this comes out, that should definitely still be a thing that we're looking forward to. And for those that don't know, I have a very special guest speaker coming to this one. Mr. Leon Noel himself is going to be there.
Thank you.
I'm actually very geeked out that you accepted this, and I'm very geeked out for what's going to happen. 100% of all ticket sales are going to charity. Everyone I've said this to has said I'm crazy, including a conversation and a meeting that I had today with somebody trying to convince me not to do that. They're like, do 50% because you're going to need the money. And I'm like, no, if I have to dig in my pocket, I'll dig in my pocket. But and the other thing is our ticket sales the ticket prices start dirt cheap. It starts at $30.
That's amazing.
I wanted to do a conference where everyone in the room is on an equal playing field and they don't feel like they don't belong. And income is not a barrier to education. Now, if somebody still comes up and is like, hey, I can't afford $30, done, you're in there. If that's a barrier, you're in there, no problem. But every single penny, no matter how expensive that ticket price is, it's all going to charity. And so I think as of right now, we've decided that we're going to be giving money to Free Code Camp, which I don't think I'd be in tech without them. And St. Jude, I believe, is another charity that we're going to be giving it to. Because some of the metrics I saw, it was like if you donate $141, it pays for 10 platelet tests for kids that need it.
That's wild.
That's very doable. Yeah. And so it's like the impact and the way they make the money stretched for good just makes sense to me.
That should be ticket price. That's like the next tier ticket price.
Yeah. Pays for 10 platelet tests.
There you go.
Yeah. And that's maybe you might be onto something. I may have to throw that on there. Anyway, but yeah, I'm very excited for this. I think we're aiming over 40 speakers at this point. I think right now I've announced 28 of them. And so we've got more coming. But as of the time of recording this, only 28 have been revealed to the public. We have more that are going to be announced. I'm trying to get the site up and live for tickets and all the good stuff. But I will tell you this from a sponsorship perspective, Leon. I have never heard so many dang no's in my life. And I mean companies that I thought were like locked in because we've done stuff in the past and it was almost instant, we can't do it. And I've learned so much in this process. I need to probably make blog articles on this because it's just how much I've learned.
The next podcast episode.
How to run a conference on zero budget. But it's been very humbling, to say the least. I've learned a lot. It's been humbling. But I'll tell you this, and I'll say it on the podcast, even though I didn't sponsor this or anything. There have been 6 companies that have come through. Yum Brands, they're like the parent company like Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut. They're donating the entire space to us, so we don't have to pay anything.
That's amazing.
We have sponsors like Grafana Labs. They've come in. They've sponsored in a big way. They're big on observability. Then we had, I'll tell you everybody right now, actually, give them a shout out because they came through when nobody else would. Hold on. I'll tell you everybody. Yeah, so GitHub, they came through. They made a special exception. And what I realized about conferences is these organizations, they plan a year in advance. And so they had to make a special exception to get me in there. Empathy Ops, I think they're incredible. They're basically DevRel that cares. And so it's a group of DevRel leaders that try to support events and people and stuff like that. AppRight, I love AppRight. They came through, and even for them, they're like, this is definitely a special exception. And Pieces for Developers, they came through, and they're going to be a part of it. So I think shout out to them for doing that. But man, I can't even tell you the sheer number of no's. I've sent out more messages than I ever thought possible. And I remember telling like my other admin in the beginning, like, oh, we got this in a bag. And just every single no rolling in, they're like, you really underestimated this. And I was like, I never would have thought. If I were to do a social media campaign or a YouTube video with them, it would be way easier to get that done than this. And it's just very interesting. And I get it. Like, there's a lot of political bureaucracy inside of a company and things that they got to do. But you attach the word charity to something and everybody's like, hold on now. This is, you've changed it up.
Yeah, when I was doing stuff, whenever I was doing like sponsor streams or things like that, the moment I mentioned that, hey, we're a fiscally sponsored not-for-profit or nonprofit, the whole process changed, like magically changed. They went from wanting to give me lots of money to watch this PowerPoint presentation, talk to this special person. It's going to take 1 year. I'd never known that the process for giving the same amount of money to a nonprofit is all those extra hurdles as opposed to just a normal individual. Yeah.
You know what's funny is like I'm fighting to get our nonprofit status for the group, and after going through this, I'm almost like maybe that's not the move.
Yeah,
it's very interesting to see the change and how people's behavior comes when they know it's for a charity versus a regular organization. And I get it, you know. I understand to a certain degree how it is for a business, but at the same time too. And this is probably definitely not great podcast material, unfortunately.
we're just yapping at this point.
That's the problem, Leon. We could talk all damn day. I probably need to cut out the word damn.
We just keep it going.
We'll
just fold this one into the next one as like the...
Yeah. I'm not cutting it out. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess since we're on the subject of IDE AI, then let me ask you this. Right now, as of the time we're recording this, there's one editor that has shocked the internet, and that's Cursor's IDE. What is your whole opinion on this?
I realize that I am susceptible to scams. Like, this is just something I know about myself. Let me I gotta give a little backstory. I begged my grandfather when I was like in middle school to take me to this presentation at the Marriott downtown in Philly to sit through what was like one of those like late night infomercial get rich quick type things. And so I just know about my brain that I'm susceptible to these types of traps. I am very business minded. I don't know why, but the hustle grind set, like that propaganda just works on me. I know it. And so I have to be careful whenever I see things like this pop up. And so when I see people that are like following the Level IO's podcast on Lex Friedman and they're grinding out full blown apps on Cursor in a weekend and they're pushing to the app store, they're making millions of dollars. Of course, I'm going to fire it all up. I'm going to get all the same pipelines going. And then I sit there and I'm like, what am I missing? Like what? How? I just want to, I want you to show me step by step how you got there. And you better not throw in your damn service that you're selling as part of the pipeline to get me there. And I feel like each time I like bookmark something on Twitter and I sit down with it, I watch it. I'm just, I don't see, I'm not able to create like that with it yet. I'm not getting the full blown app out yet. And so I just feel like I'm missing some big piece of it. And I'm very like attuned to maybe being swindled at this point in time. So that's kind of where I'm sitting. I'm like, am I getting swindled or am I just like really, really freaking dumb? And I don't understand how people are like using this without the hallucinations, without the huge, just like random debt that like, I had no idea where all these folders are there. Like it just doesn't need to be there. Like, it just hasn't made me more productive. It hasn't made me faster. I'm a curmudgeon that's still just like asking Claude direct questions. Like I don't need the integration in the editor. I just don't get it yet. I watched the founder of Gumtree's videos. I guess like he's the person I think that's probably I could see the productivity boost that they had. And I think that might be more along my process. But this idea of going from like 0 to like deployed in a weekend, I maybe my brain's too small. How about yourself? Have you been playing with it? What have you seen?
Yeah, I've definitely made some apps. I even made a YouTube video, a short, and it was cool. It was testing a theory, and I like how it's gone. And so I'm going to do it a lot further, where I very quickly spun up like a to-do list application in React. Yeah. And I was able to break it down into 9 steps on how you can create it yourself and explaining it all in 60 seconds. It was fantastic, right? It's doing really well on our company's YouTube channel and all that good stuff. And it's given me the idea, and it's got definitely spurred on, like, I want to make more content. Here's my thing with Cursor. It just feels like it's VS Code with ChatGPT built in.
Yeah.
I really can't determine the difference. But there's a lack of things that exist in Cursor that exist in VS Code for me, especially in regards to a lot of the extensions that don't make it as great of an experience, at least for me, from what I'm used to. I didn't feel like it was that earth shattering. Like it just felt like Copilot and a wrapper, which I think a lot of the AI services are going to end up being, if I'm being completely honest. You know what's funny is I've said this before, like AWS is a genius because they were like, hey, let's not increase our budget by hiring great UI developers. Let's just go ahead and throw all this crap in a random place and people will get to it however they get to it. And now you have all these industries and companies that have built up basically becoming a UI wrapper for AWS services.
Yeah.
That's kind of how all this is now starting to happen for AI services. Like, you want to use AI? We've got the wrapper for this. So here's Cursor with AI built into it. You want to use ChatGPT on Apple? Well, I'm not going to let you use ChatGPT. I'll go ahead and give you Apple Intelligence, which is just a wrapper.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of services are going to start doing that in regards to AI because a lot of people don't understand the intricacies, or they don't want to go through it, and so they just want something ready for them. Now, I have spun up applications pretty quickly with AI. I will say I don't have a service attached to it. I do have a call fee. So, Leon, we can jump on that, and I can show you
The link shows up on the screen. So
1-800 give me your money.
So has it been like a full featured app, or has it been kind of like things that an AI would be good at? Like AI should be really good at to-do lists, tic-tac-toe, like the traditional apps that would have like training data on. Have you been able to, like, I see some people doing more advanced stuff now, with like Vercel's platform, like where they can have like a full front end built for them. Like everything just kind of like comes out the gate. Like, have you done any of those types of pieces yet, or has it kind of been like?
So I built a full application for internal use where we would get like raw data from a CSV file, like a Excel spreadsheet essentially, where it'd have like somebody's like client data. Like you have all these clients that already exist, and you need to sort it out into like a database or something like that. And so you print it off the Excel sheet, and then now you're like, how do I determine the industry that they're in, and the phone numbers, and the et cetera, the company links. So we created an application literally in 3 days of essentially just taking all those CSVs, like you just drag and drop it in there. It takes all the information off for you, and it puts it into a central database that we're using internally. So that way, like for all of our clients that are in like the financial industry, we've got all their information there that we can have our financial teams like kind of work with and make sure they prioritize, instead of them just being like, well, I just have a bunch of clients. I don't necessarily know what industry they're in. So you'd have financial team working with health care clients. It's like, it's not a natural fit for them to be having those conversations. And that's also the reason why quite a few of them were like, oh, I don't have an answer for this. Let me get back to you. But if they had the right team members on that call, instead of just saying XYZ client is there, then you would make sure you're talking to the right people, and they would have the answer in that moment.
Yeah.
That ended up working.
I found that for me, like when I've used AI to build projects, the stuff that's like more like CSV heavy has been really easy for me to work with. Anything that's like more sciencey or mathy has been easy for me to work with. So I was helping my wife, who's a researcher, and they have just massive CSV files, and trying to do things in them, we would be using R and Jupyter notebooks and all that stuff. And so a lot of things that we want to do, we can kind of just prompt now. And then I can glue everything together to get it to where we can get really solid outputs. So something that used to take me probably a week of like digging deep, figuring out how to do everything, can be turned into like an hour. It's that for me has been really like game changing, and I see the power of AI there. Yeah, I just haven't had, good luck with like the full blown apps, and I probably just got to sit down and take a more serious dive into it.
Well,
but
I'll give you a hack that I learned. This is probably like the biggest tip I have if you're trying to do anything with AI. I will give it instructions to build something, and then I will say, how many questions or what questions do you need to ask of me to ensure that this comes out the way that I want it to? and it'll start prompting me like, how many fields should this have, or how many users should be able to access this, how many pages should this be, how many, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that's when I've started getting much more valuable responses, as opposed to I'd give it a response, it doesn't give what I need, I'd follow up with it, but it loses that context in between conversations. Even though it's always pretending like it has that context, I've just seen that it loses it and start.
Yeah.
Have you ever played that game of telephone where you got like 20 people in a line and you whisper the message to one and by the end it's completely different?
Yep.
I feel that's exactly what happens with AI when you don't allow it to build context before it delivers a solution.
Yeah.
But if it delivers a solution right away and you follow up with it, it loses all that context within that trail and you end up with something completely different than what you were intending it for to be.
I was reading earlier, I think it was today or yesterday, that people are having a lot more success when you have Cursor like build the full file structure for you and folder structure. Like if it can build everything from the beginning, it doesn't lose context as quickly, it doesn't hallucinate as much. And so I think the chain people are doing right now is using like the new GPT-01 to do what you said, like give me, how would I build this, taking that, passing it to Cursor with Claude 3.5, right, and then getting the full structure there and then starting to make the tweaks. And if it has that context from the beginning, it seems to be working better for people, which I think is pretty interesting.
Say, and you know, we can kind of end around this one. I will say, of all the AI tools, there's one that I've become a fan of, and I'm not really promoting it here, but I am a fan of it because I used it at a previous organization, and that's how I ended up seeing it at scale. And it's Cody AI. I think they're pretty good, and the one differentiator that tool has versus others is it's trained off of your code base. And so when we first got it and installed into this massive project, like I'm just saying ridiculously large. It shouldn't have been that large. It was ridiculously large.
Yeah.
And in the first like 2 weeks, I was the most vocal person in the organization. And I would say, we have wasted our money. This thing sucks, right? And probably by week 3, I became the biggest fan because you know why? When I would prompt it, it would not just take the component I was starting the chat from as the prompt. It went 20 or 30 components deep, analyzing all of those files. So that way it can give you the most accurate response you needed based off of your code base instead of just generic items that it learns off of the internet. And so as it took those weeks to gear up, I was like, whoa, the quality of these responses have grown tremendously and they're significantly more accurate because every single time you prompt it, it reanalyzes those components. What changed? What's different? What's the same? And based on that, it can kind of give you more specific responses.
I like that. Yeah.
Well, y'all, this has been the second episode of the Programming Podcast. And hopefully we will see y'all again at the next one. Bye, everybody.
Peace.